All right, hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the legacy of George Washington. So the video you're going to watch will be very brief, just giving an intro of what we're going to be working on in class on tomorrow's lesson. So just so you have a heads up, you should be working on this evening for some homework prior to our upcoming lesson. So what we're going to be doing tomorrow is we're going to look at objectives on identifying the major aspects of George Washington's presidency, and we'll also determine if George Washington's legacy is justified today. So you have an intro activity I want you to kind of think about before you come into class tomorrow, is I'd like you to identify 2 ways we interact with the legacy of George Washington today. So I want you to take a second on your provided sheet that you were given in class today. Take a second and think of 2 ways that we interact with George Washington and his legacy today. So you can pause the video, and then when you've identified your 2 ways, you can hit play. All right, so once you've identified your 2 ways, I want to give you some examples. I want you to compare it to what I have and what I see as George Washington and his legacy today. So first of all, pretty simple, straightforward. We see George Washington in our currency, the $1 bill. I bet many of you have had that, have seen this, have handled this currency, and have seen the president's face on it. We see our capital named after George Washington. You see the Washington Monument. This is a centerpiece of our federal government because he's kind of seen as the father of that. Continuing on, we have states named after George Washington. We have bridges named after George Washington. We have mountains named after George Washington. We even have universities. So George Washington, obviously a major figure in American history, and we're going to continue to look at his legacy with our lesson. You see a mascot of George Washington. Even the Washington Nationals run an example of George Washington around the bases during the 7th inning stretch. So again, George Washington, major part of popular culture. We see statues of him pretty much in every single state. You can even travel the world and see pictures, of statues of George Washington. Here's one of him in Paris. Here's another one even in Great Britain. In England, they have statues of George Washington, and he fought a revolution, really trying to break down part of their empire. So again, a man who is revered around the world, and we as Americans revere him, and should we? And that's what we're going to be looking at in this unit, some different aspects of him and his presidency specifically. We revere him so much, we put him on the side of a mountain. Here you see him in Mount Rushmore. All right, so just compare some of these to what you wrote down, and I want you thinking about this evening before you come into class tomorrow. So you even see examples of popular art of the time. Here's a famous painting of George Washington, and this is going to be important. We'll review this tomorrow, but you're going to be doing something a little creative with the legacy of George Washington. So I just want to show some examples, and we'll talk more about this in class. So here's one painting, very famous painting during the Constitutional Convention, George Washington presiding over all the other delegates at the time. So we'll look at this in more detail, but I just want you to take a look at it right now. Here's another very famous painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware. You see him kind of looking very leader-esque and looking forward as his army is crossing the Delaware to take on the British and German mercenaries. Continuing on, here's a famous painting of George Washington as president. A lot of symbolism in this painting we'll look at more in class as well, but again, just want you to be familiar with it for this evening and kind of your intro video for our lesson tomorrow. So what you're going to be doing, you should have a note sheet in front of you, and we're going to be looking at different stations and different research topics on George Washington. And one area I want to kind of start off with you and model, so right when you get into class you can start working within your groups, is looking at the election of George Washington. So you should have a reading entitled The Election of Washington, and you should have 2 questions within your note sheet. So kind of using our strong test-taking strategies, we'll look at the questions first that we need to answer. So it asks, what was Washington the only presidential candidate ever to do, and what traits did Washington possess that gave Americans hope he could unite the new nation? So it should say possess, so I have a typo there, so please make sure you change it within your note packet. All right, so again, here is the reading. So I'm going to read through it. If you can just kind of go through and highlight or underline what you think the correct answers would be. So no one doubted that George Washington would become the first president of the United States. The whole time the Constitutional Convention had debated the role of the president, most people had Washington in mind for the job. And Washington's popularity grew from his military leadership during the Revolution and his ability to unite divided delegates at the Constitutional Convention. With the ratification of the new Constitution, the first presidential election took place in 1788. When the presidential electors from all 13 states met in February of 1789, Washington won unanimously, the only candidate to receive every electoral college vote. John Adams, who received the second highest number of popular votes, became the vice president. On Inauguration Day, April 30th, 1789, began with the sound of a cannon and church bells. Washington stepped onto the balcony of Federal Hall on Wall Street in New York City and took his oath of office. Many Americans hoped Washington's popularity, leadership, and character would unite the newly created nation with strong sectional differences. All right, so again, our two questions. What was Washington the only president candidate to do? And what traits did Washington possess that gave Americans hope he could unite the new nation? So the first one, he received every electoral college vote. We have never had a presidential candidate do that since George Washington. It really shows the popularity he had as a candidate. And also the traits that we saw within the reading, he was popular, his strong leadership, and his moral character all really gave Americans a reason to support him as president. So again, some basic information about Washington's election that I want you to have in your note sheet for tomorrow's lesson. All right, moving on. What we're going to be doing tomorrow is you're going to be doing some more research on the different aspects of Washington's presidency. Ultimately, we want to determine the legacy. Is it justified or not within our American society today? And one creative piece you're going to do is you're going to take on the role of the artist and really create a visual representation of one aspect of Washington's presidency. So here is what your sheet will look like you'll receive tomorrow in class. You have George Washington in the middle, and you're going to fill in the rest of this frame with your artistic talent. Now, here's an example. You will complete the background with visuals that represent your assigned aspect of the Washington presidency, which you'll get in class tomorrow, and we'll briefly review this just so you're aware of what your expectations are. Once you're completed, you'll compare your visuals within the group and choose the most accurate representation to present to the class. So here's my visual. I spent a lot of time on this artwork, and mine was related to the topic of the first election. And you see here we have a guy on the left that says Virginia hearts Washington because Virginia loved him because he was a Virginian. But also you have another citizen here, New Yorkers for George Washington as well. So you actually had Washington uniting the country. So that's my visual representation. So you're going to do something similar once we're in class tomorrow. All right. So just so you know, what you'll be working on within a group tomorrow is you'll be identifying your individual roles within the group. You'll complete your assigned aspect of the reading, determining importance. You'll highlight and answer the questions. You'll complete your individual Washington visualization. You'll determine the most accurate visualization, and you'll present your research questions to the class. All right, so right now this is your opportunity. You can write down any questions you have on your note sheet. This video should just be, again, as a quick intro for what we're going to work on tomorrow, because we're going to need as much class time as possible to get in, get started, to work in groups. All right, so this will be the end of your intro video. Thanks for watching.